Hey everybody, this is Obsolete Video Services. Good morning. Of course, I'm doing a vintage video repair of this Panasonic NV8100, and I'm posting various videos of the stages of repairing this machine. But I've been getting a lot of emails about a certain thing, and I'm going to make a little video about this real quick because people have been asking me. I'm getting a lot of people asking me about capacitors, name brands, what to look for, what do I use, various things about capacitors. And I want to point this out, stress this immediately. The type of capacitor and what you buy does make a difference. So let me kind of cover this a little bit. First of all, in this machine, we got these capacitors right here, okay? These were a good brand at the time, whatever brand this was, but of course they've gone leaky or they started leaking, leaking out of the bottom. But you got to watch out on these because if you buy these on eBay, some of them are fake and they stuff smaller capacitors inside cans and they look like they're real and they're not. So be careful on the type of capacitors you buy if you buy these off eBay or larger cans. If they're not solid, you can usually tell by the weight of them. Usually if they're heavy, if they're solid and they're, perfectly wrapped inside, it's a good solid capacitor. But I prefer using, these type of capacitors. Like this particular one is a Nippon, and this is a really good capacitor. I've actually cut one of these open, and this is a solid capacitor. So, be careful on these large can capacitors because there's a lot of fake ones out there. You don't want to get screwed on these. If it's a Japan type of one or Chinese type of cap or whatever, and it's not a really good name brand, 9 out of 10 times most likely it's a fake. So stick with a name brand, a good name brand. Do your research on these big cans. Make sure you get a good capacitor, and nobody takes you for a ride on these. These are very expensive. Okay, as far as other capacitors, okay. The can ones you want to do your research on. Make sure you get a good name brand and just watch out what you buy because you can get fake ones, that type of thing. You're all good on that. Now, as far as these small capacitors, people ask me, okay, what type of capacitors do you use on these? I prefer Panasonic, the low ESR capacitors, Panasonic, the Gold Series preferably. These are really good capacitors. I've actually tried to blow some of these up, and they go way, way beyond their tolerances. These are really good caps. Compared to a lot of capacitors you see on eBay, these Jamco and some of these other cheaper ones, I really don't go with those. I really stick with the one brand, and that's Panasonic. And that's the one I use. I usually go for the Gold Series. I look up Panasonic, just Panasonic for the values I'm looking for. That's the only ones I really stick with. And these are low ESR, and these are really high quality with rubber boot bottoms on them. Pay a little bit more for these, but these are really good capacitors. Like I said, with the electrolytics, the smaller ones like this, try to stick with Panasonics. There's a lot of other brands. I haven't tried every one of them, but I don't really prefer capacitors. Like I said, I try to keep with high quality in everything I do. So if you want to do recapping vintage video machines like I'm doing and putting brand new capacitors in, I recommend go all Panasonic if possible. And if you're doing some of the axle lead capacitors, stick with the yellow jobbers if you can with the values you're looking at. There's not really any name brand on these. There's several different name brands, but these yellow quality ones are really, really good. And sometimes the Mylar ones, if you have to, like I said, try to stick with name brands on some of these. Some of these capacitors are a real nightmare, and people are having a lot of problems because they're cheap or they're fake. So try to stick with high quality. Pay the money for them. They may be more expensive, but they're worth spending the money on. High quality capacitors is what you get is what you pay for. If you go the cheap route and you get capacitors that don't have any names on them, and and you look at them and they don't last, or you put them in and they don't work, or they're dried out. And that brings up another point. If you're getting capacitors on eBay, try to find out what the manufacturing date was on them before you buy them to make sure that they have a fresh level to them. Some people are selling capacitors that have been sitting in boxes, and they've been sitting in boxes for decades, and they look new, but they're not. They're just as dried out as the the capacitors that's actually in the machine that you're recapping. So do your diligence on when you're buying capacitors. Make sure you don't get screwed. Check if they're fresh. Check when they were made, if they even know. If they're in a box and they said they've been sitting for years, pass by. Go to look for another auction for something that has fresher capacitors. The fresher the capacitor, the better. If the electrolytes are still really good and they're virtually brand new, you'll get better lifespan out of them. But if they're already dried out in boxes, you're defeating the purpose by putting brand new capacitors in and restoring vintage equipment. So capacitors should be fresh, new, good quality. Look up the name brands. Do your research on them. Don't get screwed on these. I've bought capacitors in bulk and they've been, they look new, and unfortunately they're all dried out. I've got screwed on a lot of capacitors that I bought. So do your research. Ask how long they are. Do you have a date when they were made? If they're relatively fresh, good brand, that type of thing. Don't buy the Chinese one and those other ones. They're pretty much all fake. So don't even really go that route. They stuff them with caps like this inside big cans like this. And when it comes to these yellow jobbers, relatively these are pretty good high quality. I haven't really seen many problems with these. Buy good ones like these. Spend the money on the capacitors. It's worth it. Especially if you're doing vintage electronic restoration like this. Like I said, do it once, do it right. If you don't do it right from the first time and you have to go back and do it again because it's not working right, it's just more work on your end. So do it once the first time, spend the money on the capacitors, just get it right. Hope you guys enjoyed this video.